Um,
Oh, there
hello.
we go. Now we're live.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I am here with Nick Breau. He is a computer hacker turned people hacker and one of the most interesting, fascinating, masterful facilitators I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of really good ones. In my men's group, I see guys help other guys with really deep problems and give them really significant shifts very quickly. Guys that are as good as Tony Robbins, just not doing it in front of 5,000 people like Tony does. They do it in front of whatever. So I've seen a lot of really great facilitators, and Nick is as good as anybody I've seen. The stuff that he does for people really quickly, really gently, really powerfully, just gets them from one state of being to another. He's very, very skillful and insightful about law of attraction. He knows a lot about other modalities. He and I have been friends for a while. We've great conversations, and I'm so excited to introduce him to my community to have this conversation today. Welcome, Nick.
Awesome. Love chatting with you. Love we have our little chats once in a while, and it's great to be on here with your peeps and your community, and to spread some positive messages to more people.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. So, a lot of people in my community are in Los Angeles or, like the sort of vibe. And out in LA, people are open to different sort of things and ways of thinking about spirituality and personal growth stuff. So, let me go here. Um, so, yeah, so my community is definitely sort of open-minded-ish, but not everybody. So tell me, let's talk about a few of the things that you've done that's really, because I know one of the main things when I first heard about you that was most impressive to me. I was like, oh, he did that. But tell me a couple of things, people you've sort of like notable ways you've helped people transform that might be really seemingly amazing to other people.
Yeah, what I like in what you just said, and this is a little bit of a different answer, but this is where I'm getting nudged to go, is like talking about openness, right? And like, what people's belief systems are, because ultimately your belief systems are what impact, what you're open to and what you're open to learning and what you're open to receiving. And I remember, I was the computer science, analytical mind, tech guy where I spent, 10 years working in startups where I didn't believe in half the stuff that I know now. And for me, the journey kind of started when I was sitting in my cubicle, looking around my office and noticing that, like, most people here aren't depressed, but most people here aren't really happy either, right?
Yeah.
And then that sent me down this journey of exploring, I don't want to be stuck in this cubicle for the next 50 years and turn into one of those grumpy men that just sit at their desktop 9 to 5 and rot away, right? I want to enjoy my life. So, that's when I started digging into like a whole bunch of different things, the natures of happiness, spirituality. And that sent me down this really, really deep rabbit hole and fun rabbit hole. And a pivotal moment for me was one night I remember going to bed early, and I remember like waking up and looking at the clock, and it was 11:11. And I'm sure a lot of people here have seen like 11:11 number sequences and things like that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I went back to sleep. And then I woke up again and I look at the clock and it was 1:11. I was like, okay, that was weird. And I went back to sleep and I woke up again and then it was like 3:33. And then I was starting to freak out a little bit. Didn't realize, I was thinking maybe I'm still dreaming. I don't know. So I went back to sleep. And then I woke up and I kind of kept my eyes closed and I was consciously awake. My eyes were closed. And I was like, if I open my eyes and I see another one of those goddamn number sequences, and then I opened my eyes and of course it was like 5:55. And then I just went snowballed from there. Right. I started looking into numerology and I'm a number 11 in numerology. It talked about psychic stuff. I started playing in remote viewing, which is what the CIA did in the 70s. There was a project called Project Stargate, and Men Who Stare at Goats was loosely based on that program.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were mocking it more than anything, but that sent me down a path where I studied and learned remote viewing successfully, and it was really quite an experience. And that just opened up the doors to.
So how did you study remote viewing?
So remote viewing was developed by two people, one of which is a guy named Russell Targ, who's actually known for being part inventor of laser technology. So remote viewing itself is a very scientific approach to kind of doing psychic work. So it's protocol driven, where you attune to a target. So the target is blind to you. So there's essentially a tasker and what you would call a team of viewers. So if you have a task that you want to set up, you're like, okay, there's a missing person, or I want to just create a practice target. I'm going to put this apple on a table. And then you just take a piece of paper and you write down the target. And the target could be just a random number. It could be GPS coordinates. You put that target in an envelope and then you give me the number. So I'm completely blind to what the target is. The target could be a missing person. It could be a snowman in the front yard. It could be describing the location of GPS coordinates. And then what I do as the viewer, I'm given the number, which gives me something to kind of like psychically attune to. And then I start writing down what it is that I'm feeling from that target. And sometimes you're way off and it's a miss. Other times it's so on target, it's mind blowing. Right. So that's remote viewing in a nutshell. And that's how the CIA used to use it in the 70s.
Wow. so like, so you studied that, you started studying some other modalities. Tell us how you then started helping other people use different ways to get stuff, right? Because
yeah,
there's a spiritual part of us, right? And then there's a part of us in the real world that like needs to like eat and get money and blah blah blah. So like, and that's the part most people are focused on
or looking for. Totally. Yeah. So again, I was in this world of tech. And once I started learning a lot of these concepts, learning about law of attraction, and starting applying the concepts. And that's the big difference for a lot of people, is a lot of people will read book after book after book, and they'll accumulate tons of head knowledge, but there's a big difference between knowing the concepts and applying them. So I really focused on applying. I would say maybe a year and a half later, the company was acquired for something like 330 million USD. So I made a good little chunk of change, and that gave me the ability to step away from that world. And when I did, I continued to focus on spirituality and personal development. And what I started to realize was that, with the law of attraction, when people first think about law of attraction, they think, oh, it's about creating a vision board.
Let's jump in real quick. Let's give people that are new to law of attraction, give them an overview of what that even is.
Yeah. So the traditional view of law of attraction is that, you're going to create a vision board and you focus so intently on your desires and use affirmations that your desire will suddenly manifest. And really, I think it's the movie The Secret that made it mainstream. And my interpretation of law of attraction, and the more kind of when you really start to study it, you start to understand that this is really more what it's about, is it's understanding that your entire reality is a reflection of what you've got going on inside of you, what you're practicing. Mm-hmm. So the thoughts you think, the emotions you feel are really being reflected back to you in your reality. So for example, when I work with clients who struggle, let's say, with bad relationship patterns. So some people will constantly re-attract the same unwanted circumstances in relationships. And in my book, I talk about the 5 archetypes of attraction, where when you identify the emotions being carried by that person, you'll notice that the dominant 1 or 2 emotions in their emotional baggage are the exact same emotions being reflected to them in those kind of unwanted relationship unfoldings. So for example, somebody who's always being ghosted in relationships, or attracting people who are never there for them or unsupportive, are typically people who grew up in an environment where one of the parents wasn't emotionally present for them, or where they were abandoned by one of their parents. So what's really cool about law of attraction, personal development, and what I started doing is you can reverse engineer your reality to find out what you've got going on inside of you. And then when you find out what you've got going on inside of you, you can then shift those aspects of yourself, which then create a different reality experience.
So one quick thought here that I've had that we haven't talked about, but I've thought about for a while, because I hear you often refer to as, the reality. We create the reality, and I think that's pretty common in LOA circles. Um, to my mind, a word that speaks to it would be perception, right? Because there's and maybe this is just a difference in terms of how we see law of attraction. Because
Yeah.
to me, the perception is the thing that's sort of malleable and created based on our family situation originally, and then we kind of keep repeating it, and we can adjust and keep sculpting the perception. To me, that's still a subjective experience of objective of object. Like when I think of reality, I think of objective reality. But oftentimes I hear you and others say, no, you actually change your reality. And to me, that sounds like you're kind of crossing the line from subjectivity to objectivity. And whereas to me, what I'm changing is my perception of it, which impacts my experience of life. So I'm curious about those words because I know you're careful about word choices. So
Yeah, it's like when you shift your perception,
Mhm.
you're then shifting your experience,
Yes,
right?
yes,
So somebody who, let's say, has a lot of tense um, neck and shoulder issues, those people, that's often a reflection of having a deeper feeling of feeling either under a lot of stress and pressure
Mhm.
or not good enoughness.
Yeah,
So when you've got that strong feeling of not good enoughness, reality is constantly mirroring it back to you,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
it's a triggered effect by the mind, but it's also a, like I said, a mirrored response. So when you say, okay, all of my circumstances are making me feel like I'm never good enough, then you can go inside of yourself, okay, and this feeling that I'm not good enough, where does it come from? Right. And then you start shifting it. So for example, you can ask that question, this emotion, I feel this way because, and then you see what comes up in your mind, because a lot of people don't even realize that, people know what emotions are, but they don't really even understand how emotions work. Right. And you cannot have an emotion without an underlying perspective slash belief that fuels it.
yeah.
So if you've got this emotion of I'm not good enough, you start asking the words, well, I feel that way because, and sometimes things will come through that you're not even aware were even there.
Yeah.
Right. So
But
go ahead.
eventually, because just so people don't know, if you've never seen Nick in action, he's got all sorts of stuff on YouTube. You can check him out. But one of the things I love about your approach is you will just ask people those questions. They'll be struggling with, I want more money, I want a relationship, I want this, I want that. And Nick asks these really simple, direct, gentle questions.
Yeah.
And that gets them to kind of bring up the perception choices that they've created that they're repeating. And he's like, well, what's underneath that? What's going on there? And literally in guys like 5 or 10 minutes, you see somebody who's really effing stressed out or even crying, and Nick just has them go zoop, and they're like
Yeah.
shining, and they're like, I feel great. It's
Well, what
amazing.
happens is these beliefs get anchored often in childhood, and we don't even realize that they're there. And they're often very easy to shift if you can gain the awareness. So, for example, I worked with an entrepreneur who realized that every time she was about to sign like a really big 7-figure deal, she would self-sabotage it. And she could not break the pattern. She couldn't figure out what it was about. So we started digging into her past. And you don't have to get all sentimental, like therapy dig into your past. Like it's just me asking questions just to probe. And she said that when she was a child, I don't remember the age, maybe like 10 or 12, she said that her father had passed away from a heart attack. And but she had been to therapy and she dealt with all of that. And I was like, okay, cool, but just humor me, share me a little bit about what happened. And she shared that they were a very wealthy family. Her dad was an entrepreneur just like she was. And somebody came along and offered her father a sure shot deal. And he was convinced. He invested the family's entire fortune into this supposedly sure shot deal, which of course wasn't sure shot. They lost all of their money, and it was so traumatic for him. He had a heart attack and passed away. So this client, her subconscious mind had then made the association between her dad's passing and finances. So now subconsciously, and she didn't realize she was doing it, but subconsciously, our subconscious mind, one of its roles is to keep us safe. So if the subconscious mind now sees money as a threat, every time she's about to sign this big deal, it would trigger that self-sabotaging pattern, right? So then we did some clearing work. We helped her understand that, we broke that link between money and unsafety. And once she broke that link, then it was smooth sailing ahead, right?
So I love that. But let's look at this here. So if we, in this case, there's a person who had a childhood trauma and then created a perception that, oh, getting money was unsafe, and all of a sudden, as an adult, she's sabotaging before this money comes in. You create that link. I can totally understand how you could put that together as an insightful person and help her see it for herself. But because that was a perception that was pretty deep seated, and it was a pattern that she kept sort of repeating and kind of anchored in, how you've talked about the discovery of it, which is insightful and interesting. How do you go from there to really developing and anchoring that new habit? Because it's a durable perception, right?
I love that question, because a lot of people try to compensate a positive state to kind of squash a negative state. And that's why people do affirmations. So people who feel like they're not good enough, they might get in front of a mirror and they'll go, I am good enough. I can do it. I'm good enough, right? So they're trying to kind of wrap the not good enoughness or cover it up with good enough, right? But you know what? As long as that feeling or that belief, because it's always a perception, because that perception of not good enough is still there, you're always pushing against it. Even if you can wrap it up temporarily, it keeps coming back, especially when you've got circumstances in your reality that reflect it back to you. So the path that I recommend is, instead of trying to cover up those sticky parts of us, those heavier, dense parts of us, to look at them, right? Look at them, feel them, process them, ask that question, I feel that way because, and see what comes up. And when that belief comes up, when that perspective comes up, if you can invalidate it, if you can prove to that inner critic mind of yours that that belief doesn't make sense, the belief then goes away, and so does that negative emotion.
So, so then the question is, yes, so you can't just be like, affirmation, I'm this, and then it happens, right? Because we've got that underneath it, the belief. But is it in your experience that literally once you sort of, it's like, how for those deeper identity type beliefs, doesn't it take a few times or a few ways of kind of reapplying it? Or
it's not about reapplying. So the main process that I've developed, we call it the belief tree process.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's called the belief tree process is it's almost like a tree structure, mm-hmm. where that belief of, like, let's say not good enough. And I go back to not good enough because it's one of the more popular ones.
It's a common one, yeah.
Yeah, not popular, but common. So when you have a negative emotion like not good enough, it might be anchored by 2 or 3 different perceptions. So there could be, I'm not good enough because dad said so. I'm not good enough because I don't have a 7-figure bank account. I'm not good enough because I haven't sold my script to, XYZ studio yet. So a negative emotion can be reinforced by maybe 2 or 3 different perceptions. And the key to kind of really clearing it is by identifying and removing all of those perceptions. Now, it's not a hard thing to do, because if you say, okay, I'm not good enough because dad said so. Okay, well, is dad the authority of who is or isn't good enough on the planet? Of course not. Right. Was anybody good enough for dad? No. So does that truly mean that I'm not good enough if dad couldn't see it? Of course not. Right. And once you have that realization, it's like it snips that branch away. And now that one's not anchoring you down anymore. And then if you can still feel that not good enough, then you ask the question again. Okay, now I still feel that way because, then see what comes up next. Right. And eventually things will stop to surface and you'll stop feeling it once you've worked through all of those beliefs. And for most people, there's not hundreds of beliefs anchoring it. Usually it's maybe 1 to 5 kind of major beliefs.
So let's say it's belief like I'm not good enough because of whatever. You've got 3 branches. You go in, you do your process, snip one branch, you snip the other branch, snip the 3rd branch. You guys did a lot of deep work in whatever, half hour. do those connections ever grow back? Do you have to then kind of go back and re-snip them the next week or something? Or
Not typically. So what happens is, let's say that this right here, this is your baseline down here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is like how you feel on a day-to-day in this feeling of not good enough. And most people, they've been holding on and feeling these negative emotions for so long, they don't even realize that they're there anymore. It's like background noise.
Yeah.
Right. Once you snip all of that stuff away and you float back up to that feeling of good enoughness,
Mm-hmm.
it's like it becomes this new baseline, so that when that old trigger of not good enough comes back, you're kind of not used to it anymore. So it's like it becomes very apparent and it almost feels worse. But that's a good thing because now you're aware of it. And now when it surfaces and you feel it, you can say, oh, that guy's trying to come back again. You can look at it and say, you know what? I don't buy into that anymore. Right? You have more control over it.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, cool. So let's, and I know a lot of people in my community, I know your community is watching this and mine, are screenwriters. So we're going to get into some specific sort of ways of thinking about how you would sort of suggest different ways of approaching some of the challenges that screenwriters face. But before we get that, I want to touch on this one thing. I want to touch on this one thing. When the first times I heard about you, I heard that you got into the hot seat. At that point, I think it was like 9 times, and then it's up to like 11 or 12 now. So for people who don't know about what I'm talking about, one of the sort of leading figures in the law of attraction is this woman Esther Hicks, who channels, which means she feels like she's open to spirits, a collection of spirits, kind of telling her these really amazing, wise things. And she has this whole sort of, she's written lots of books, and she's been on Oprah, and she basically gets in front of a whole group of people and has conversations with, I don't know, 6 of them, 8 of them, or something like that for a couple hours. And now she does an online version of it. And you see a million clips of her on YouTube where she really does a beautiful job transforming people in 10, 15 minutes, basically getting them to, think differently. She kind of she channels as Abraham Hicks is how she channels.
Yeah, let me explain it so people can really understand what it is, because like my girlfriend Nick, she's learned how to do it too.
Yeah.
So what it is source is real, whether you believe it or not. Just because science hasn't proven it, source is real. So there is more to us than our human 3D physical existence and physical reality. And what she does is she is what I would call, same as my partner Anik, very vibrationally sensitive, very sensitive to energy. So most people have heard the term empath, right? An empath is somebody who feels other people's emotions. And some people are naturally born empaths. Some people kind of work their way into it. And the example that I use is if I made a delicious bowl of chili, and Brooks, if I gave you that bowl of chili and I said, you taste this chili and you tell me what ingredients are in it. Okay. And if I gave that same bowl to a 3-star Michelin chef, I can guarantee you that chef is going to be able to tell me exactly what ingredients and exactly what spices, because they've spent so much time refining their palate and tasting foods. They've become, we'll call it vibrationally sensitive to what they can pick up. Mm-hmm. Right. So as humans, we have the ability to feel energy. Okay. So people who are empath, the way they're picking up on other people's emotions is they're feeling their energy. They've attuned themselves. They've practiced themselves to feeling other people's energies so much. And often people do this at a subconscious level, mm-hmm. that they have developed that ability. So what Esther does on stage, and what Nick learned to do by being in the presence of Esther, actually, they explained it to us, is she is not only able to feel the emotions of other people's, but she's able to connect with that energy of source. So when people ask their questions, source is literally feeding her the vibration of the words, which are the answer to those questions, and then she's speaking them out loud. Right. So when she's talking, it's not Esther that's talking. Esther's there and she's present and she's in a unconscious isn't quite the right word, but she's not consciously present. She's in that channeled state where she's just attuning to the stream of words that are coming to her and sharing them. And it's a very powerful and fun experience. And there's not a lot of people that can do it. I've been in this world for 15, 20 years, and I've maybe met 5 people who do it in this way. It's very powerful, and it's such a great, fun thing to do, to be able to sit there and have a conversation with infinite intelligence, because Source is infinitely intelligent and unconditionally loving. And you can really feel that unconditional love too when you listen to both my partner Nick and Esther, in the way she channels what she calls Abraham.
I don't know if that clears things up more for people that are new to this or freaks them out. But like, here's the thing that my suggest. Anybody who's listening to this and is sort of new to these things or feeling skeptical or whatever, it's perfect, right? The key is always trust your skepticism, and just kind of lean into it and explore it to whatever extent you're interested, you know. And if you're not, then it's like, okay, that's it for now. When I actually first ran across Esther Hicks, she was channeling, it was like in the 90s, some tape. I was, at that point it was like a cassette tape or something. And she was channeling with a very sort of weird voice. And I was like, what? And I was like, and I just kind of dismissed it. That was it. And then many years later, my wife was like, oh, you got to see this person. I was like, oh, she looks familiar, whatever. And then she kind of didn't channel with that voice. So that wasn't a thing that I was creating sort of a resistance to it. And I just listened to, like, I was like, I don't channel. I don't know what that experience is for me. Yeah. But if I just kind of put that aside, like, I don't know, what's for sure is I don't have all the answers. There's things out there that I don't know. So maybe this is one of those things I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. What I definitely saw was in those clips on YouTube, you can check it out. You see a person in a state of distress in the beginning, and at 10 or 12 minutes later, they are feeling good. That transformation, for all my screenwriting people out there, that's what we're doing with our screenplay. Act 1 to Act 3 is a transformation of some sort in your life. And what's amazing about Esther Hicks is she's doing that person after person after person on those clips. And Nick does it in his own way in a really fascinating, which I really like your series. That's like a 30-minute version of transformations. Also on YouTube you can find, which is, it's just, we love as human beings those transformations. It's really exciting. In movies and shows are sort of very big operatic versions of that. Nick does it with real people in real, in his community, on videos. And some people do it with this channeling thing. Okay, so speaking of this stuff, I'm trying to.
There's so much stuff we could talk about.
Hold on, I got to get to this one point. And then I promise everybody we're going to talk about practical things you can use as a screenwriter to actually navigate some of your obstacles in the business using these ideas. Okay, but before we do that, when I first heard about you, Nick, I don't know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, a while ago, I heard that you'd gotten into the hot seat like 9 times. So when we're talking about Esther Hicks, she has let's picture this room of, I don't know, 1,000 people, 2,000 people, or whatever it is, 500 people. It's a lot of people. And she basically kind of feels it out and goes, you, and picks somebody. They walk up on stage and then they go, yeah, I've got this question. And then she has a conversation, channeling, has a conversation. So like, but she's kind of, most people would think, oh, she's randomly picking people or whatever.
Not random at all. Yeah, it's
you say, but
source guided.
Hold on. Yeah. But what happened is Nick has gone to these experiences and basically was getting picked to go on stage first once, twice, 3 times, and they did it like 9 or 10 times. So statistically, that would be impossible. So you were doing something, Nick, that energetically allowed her to choose you. How the hell did you do it?
Yeah. So, and this is kind of a law of attraction thing. So, when most people, when they have their hand up in the audience, so, and she won't pick you unless your hand is up, but I'd say half the room maybe has their hand up. And so when your hand is up, the state of consciousness that most people practice when their hand is up is pick me. I hope she picks me. Right.
Yeah.
And what I would do when I would put my hand up, as I would go, all right, mine turn now. I'm right here. Right. And if you tune into yourself, feel the energetic difference between the state of being of feeling, I hope she picks me, which is a state of doubt, versus I'm right here, which is a state of, let's call it confidence. Right. And I love that you brought me into this story in the context of screenwriters, because the question screenwriters want to ask themselves when they're submitting their screenplays to be evaluated, or whoever they send them to, is what state of being are you in when you're sending that script? What's your expectation level?
That's right. That's exactly where I was going, and it was fascinating because it was pretty subtle, but pick me, or oh, my turn.
I'm right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm right here. Here I am. You've been looking for me. Yeah, I'm right here. And that
Yeah.
energy, and what the old saying in Hollywood is, you can't be boring and you can't be desperate. Right? The boring part is actually just not being authentic enough, but the desperate part is exactly what you're talking about. And when they say celebrities have the it factor, or actors, they come walking in and they just have the clink, and it's exactly what you're talking about.
And the it factor, people might think it's about their looks or their tone of voice, or I know that the true it factor is the vibration you're practicing, the energy. This whole law of attraction stuff, it applies so much to the music industry and Hollywood. Like, if I could get in a room with a bunch of actors, man, they would start nailing gigs like there's no tomorrow.
That was actually, what? That's interesting you brought that up. That was exactly one of the reasons why I went from skeptic, like this is all bullshit, like to like, that's really interesting. I have an accountability partner who's an actor and TV writer, and he did two things. One is he was showing up for acting gigs with no attachment. I love actors, and most of them are really desperate for work, right?
Yeah.
And he wasn't. He was just like, oh, this is fun. I'm going to read some sides. I'm going to have this thing, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wow, that energy is so different. And he started booking stuff.
Yeah.
And then same thing as a TV writer, he was like, oh, I just got this new job on this TV show, and I didn't have to wrestle it down. It just kind of came to me. It was really easy. And my head was like, wow. I was like, well, hold on a second. I've been like hustling my whole life. How do you, why is it not like, what? Like, how does that even work? And how would it was mind blowing, but it was working for him for exactly what you're saying.
And I love this. And this is going to tie into screenwriting beautifully. So a few years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago now, I was asked to speak to a group of writers because I've got a couple of books out too, and they all had
a great book called Power Manifesting.
Yeah, that book feels so delicious to me. It was, anyways, I'll get to that in a second. So this group of writers, I don't remember, it was an online thing. There was maybe 15 or 20 of them. I don't remember exactly how many, but they all had writer's block. Okay. And they all had this pressure of, I got to meet this deadline, and my book has to change the world, and all of this stuff. And what people don't understand is the best stuff, and I think a lot of the screenwriters here that are listening are going to really jive with this, is the best stuff that you write doesn't come from here. It comes from like a deeper place, almost like it's just flowing from nowhere. Like it's, and when you're writing it, you can feel the deliciousness in what you're writing with every click of the keyboard, right? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And like, that's the state of being, because that is a state of being. That's the state of being that really allows your best work to come through. And when you're in that state of pressure and stress and deadlines and overwhelm, you're cutting off that stream. So that stream is what I call your connection to source. You're channeling that information, just like we talked about channeling earlier, from a deeper place within you, from a higher place. For me, I've got 2 paperbacks that are about 200 to 250 pages. And the first draft of all my paperbacks, I wrote in less than 2 weeks. And the difference is I didn't go out and say, okay, I need to change the world. I need to write a book. It was just like the nudge was there. It was like, ooh, there's something delicious sitting there, and I've got the impulse to go write. So I just sat down and I just created a nice little outline. I was like, ooh, this feels really good. And then I just would keep writing. And the next thing I know, 2 to 3 weeks later, 2.5 weeks tops, I'm sure, I've got the whole draft done. Right. And it's done 10,000 copies, 5 out of 5 on Amazon. And it's one of my most proud accomplishments when it comes to my work, because I didn't care if 5 people bought the book. I didn't care if 500 people bought the book. For me, it was the experience of of writing out just something that felt so juicy and delicious. And when you're writing, whether it's a screenplay or cooking in the kitchen or in the zone playing poker, it doesn't matter what you're doing, but when you feel good when you're doing it, that's when that connection happens, and that's that flow state that people talk about.
Yeah. No, well, it's music to my ears. Anybody who's like in my programs knows that that's exactly what I say all the time. Because, and when I write myself, it feels like that. It feels like it just comes out of me. It's just easy. It feels like it writes itself.
And a lot of people you guys know exactly what I'm talking about, this flow state. And I'm sure a lot of people are sitting here watching this going, yeah, but you can't control it, right? A lot of people know about it, but a lot of people don't understand that, yes, it's something that you can develop, that you can build like a muscle, that you can learn to attune to. And no, you're not going to be there 101% of your day, but you can get to a place where you're there 80 to 90% of your day. And that's where I operate. And that's where a lot of my clients operate once you work through the things that kind of cut that off. And that's, one of the things, I would say more important things that I teach is that connection that's supposed to be there. That's part of who we are. But most people are living life without that connection because of the stress, the pressure, the anxiety, the fears. And then ultimately what happens is it makes reality so much more efforting and unpleasant than what it is when you nurture that connection and live in that connection. And of all the stuff that I teach, if there was one message that I would say is more important than anything else, it's wishing humanity would realize that they all have that connection inside of them, and how positively life-changing reality gets, not in just the way you feel, but also in what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
When you make that connection a priority. And it's not a hard thing to do. There's just kind of some initial work, in order to work your way back into that, because we're born with it. We just kind of get programmed out of it.
Can you speak to this idea? Because I think some people are going, well, okay, that sounds good, but like if I just sit around and think about stuff, how is that going to work? And I think so there's this, to me, the phrase inspired action is a good one, and very different than like hustle or grinding or pounding the pavement, right? Those are two very different sort of energetic phrasings of, in one way that might look on the outside similar. So how can you speak of the difference between like hustling and like inspired action? Or do you like that phrase, inspired action? Or
Yeah. That's brilliant. So as humans, society is very, let's call it like mind dominant. So all of our development in the first 20 years of our life is focused on the development of intellect, right? School, university, like everything is about, society basically kind of says that if you want to be successful, this is what you have to develop up here, right? And yeah, the mind is part of, it's needed in order to experience physical reality. I don't want to downplay the importance of the mind. But what happens is we've trained ourselves to allow our minds to overcome and kind of push out that deeper connection that I was talking about, which is also where intuition comes from. So if you look at animals,
hold on, if I can jump in really quick,
yep.
And I won't go on a soapbox about education system. I do that a lot in my community. But I would say even more so than, the educational system making us heady, I think underneath that it's saying passion is secondary, not central, and obedience to like we don't give humans the autonomy that they, and support for them creating their own reality, creating their own structure. They hoist structure on top of it, and it really boxes in the soul much too tightly. And then people, like Bob Dylan said, 20 years of schooling, and they put you on the day shift, because they basically to one box to the next box, as opposed to what we're saying is no, we create our own box. Totally. And so why would we not create a box from our passion to meet the passions of other people? Well, because most people don't do that, because they were trained to just sit in the box and basically do stuff in their head. So anyway, back to
that leads to unhappiness and a whole bunch of other stuff, but that's another topic. So for me, in the understanding of, let's call it the overdevelopment of intellect, it cuts us off from that deeper intuitive part of us. So if you look at the animal kingdom, birds up here in Canada, they go south every winter, and they don't pull their iPhone out of a pocket to look at their calendar to see when it's time to go south. And they don't open up Google Maps to figure out which direction they need to fly in. They just get an impulse of, oh, it's time to go south, and an impulse of, this is the direction I need to fly in. Right. So as humans, and a lot of people here have probably had those like synchronistic impulses, right? And sometimes they're explainable, sometimes they're not. But a lot of the times we allow the mind to discount them. So a lot of what I teach is learning to tune into that inner guidance and living through excitement and living through impulse.
Yeah.
And like the more you start to attune yourself to listen to those things, the more kind of magical you start to realize those things are. Like sometimes I'll be walking down the street and I'll get the impulse to go into a store that I have no intention of going into. And I'll go in, and sometimes maybe I'll meet somebody that, there was a conversation that I had to have to kind of help that person. Sometimes it was somebody that I knew that was in there. I experienced a lot of synchronicities that a lot of people wouldn't even believe in. So for example, my partner, Nick. So my name is Nick. Her name is Nick. So we virtually share the same name. When we met, we were both driving the same type of car. We were both into the spirituality, woo-woo stuff. And after chatting, we even realized that we had both left our marriages on the same day before we'd ever met. So for me, a lot of what I share is that these types of synchronicities are actually kind of almost a natural occurrence when you're living with that aligned state that we kind of allow our intellect to disconnect us from.
Yeah. Yeah. In my community, we talk about that as arrows, like arrows towards, like one of the projects that I set up was absolutely this sort of thing. It was like, I saw this, it was a screenplay about this fighter from the 1920s. And there was a UFC fighter who was the most popular UFC fighter at the time. And I saw an interview of him, and he actually was into the law of attraction, this guy. But I just had this impulse, like, oh, you know what? If this guy was involved in my project, I could probably move it forward. Then I had second impulse, oh, there's a producer that I know who's a big fan of the script. I think he knows somebody that knows that guy. So I call him up. I go, hey, what's going on? I know but maybe you should be directing this project, because he was a great director of some stuff. And he goes, oh, by the way, I just signed a deal with this other UFC fighter who happens to have it, that really was friends with this other one that I'd seen by impulse. I love that script. I've always loved the script. Let me send it to this other UFC fighter. Sends it to him. He loves the script. He's on board. And then literally from that first impulse to that, a week later, that guy that I saw in the interview, the UFC fighter, was tweeting about my project on my Twitter feed. So, and that's just it. It's impulses. And if I wasn't open to those impulses and following them, that wouldn't have happened. So that particular guy ended up falling out, not being involved in the project. But then right after him, this other guy did, and then all of a sudden, the thing gets set up. So it's those impulses that we listen to, and then we can't just listen to them and sit on the couch and eat a sandwich. We need to then have inspired action and go, oh, well, where does this lead me to? And it was like, ooh, I get to have a call with a colleague that I like.
And sometimes those impulses don't lead us to where we expected them or wanted them to lead us, but that doesn't mean the impulse was wrong. It means that what it is that you experienced was still part of the journey, and maybe what you needed to experience in order to kind of get to where you're really trying to go.
Yeah. And that's the important thing, because a lot of people on this were like, okay, now I'm a little more open to this sort of thing, and then they try to follow an impulse, and then and then some sort of adversity happens or something different. They go, F those guys, it's full of crap, right? But it's not. It's like, and that was the thing with my friend who booked that TV writing gig by not trying at all. He's allowing it to kind of happen. And he just seemed so light and easy. He was enjoying his goddamn life more than I was. And I was like,
and that's
okay.
The key. So,
hold on, let me finish. Because then I thought, well, hold on a second. I'm still skeptical about this, law of attraction BS. But if nothing else is different, I just enjoy my life. And then the same exact, randomness happens. That's better off than being cranky about my life and facing the things. So I do believe that there's something going on there, but why not be happier? And so that's kind of how a big turning point in my mind is like, oh, maybe there's more to this than I was giving it.
And that's the paradox. So that connection that I'm talking about, that really is what makes life really magical and synchronistic. The way you learn to attune to that connection, what establishes that connection, is the way you feel. So the happier you feel, the stronger, the more nurtured that connection becomes. And it's things like stress, pressure, overwhelm, anxiety that create disconnect from that.
Yeah.
And the challenge is, people are putting all this pressure on themselves and the stress on themselves is, I have to achieve XYZ in order to be happy.
Yeah.
Right. And then, well, you're disconnecting from that flow that's going to allow you to achieve the XYZ by creating that dependence.
Yeah.
Right. So,
yeah.
the one of the biggest ways that as humans we give our power away, whether we realize it or not, is in allowing circumstances to dictate the way we allow ourselves to feel.
Yeah, that was another huge turning point for me personally, because a lot of people have that idea of like, oh well, well, we're set up to say, if I have this, then I'll feel good. But you have to flip that. You have to say, I'm going to feel good no matter what hand I'm dealt. And I went through a whole sort of process myself to kind of train myself to sort of feel good no matter what hand I was dealt. First, by just being aware of how I was feeling, and then shifting it slightly. And it really makes a big difference. We really have more control over our, in my words, perception. And those feelings that are, I've been thinking about it recently in the way of sort of, everybody knows mindset, but I really like this idea of emotion set, that we create, ideas and theories, and then feelings that kind of surround it. We create those both in our perception as kids, and we can re-sculpt them over and over so that we have an emotion set that feels as powerful as possible.
Yeah. And people think that it's a lot more complicated than it really is. They might be sitting there going, oh yeah, Nick and Brooks, you guys make it sound like it's so easy. But I got a really simple process. It's in my book. It's in Power Manifesting. It's on my YouTube channel. It's called the Fuck It Happy Game. Right. Yeah. And basically it's just a practice where you focus on feeling good in the morning. You rank your level of how good you feel on a 0 to 10 scale. And then throughout the day, you check in to see, how well you can maintain that feeling. So if this morning you did a practice, you got all the way up to a 7, just check in every couple of hours. Am I still at a 7? Awesome. And then by 2 o'clock, if you notice you drop down to a 3, you just check in. Okay, what did I allow to drop from a 7 to a 3? Oh, it was my boss who's such a jerk. Okay, so tomorrow when I'm at work, I'm going to be consciously aware that my boss causes me to dip, and I'm going to flex that muscle and try to maintain that 7 tomorrow. So it just creates a little bit of conscious awareness. But what's also interesting when you practice that is you start to notice that all of the different circumstances that cause you to dip are likely all triggering the same thing. And when you do that clearing work we talked about earlier and work through that emotion that's always being triggered, guess what happens to those triggers? They're not triggers anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
It's awesome. It's very, very similar to what I did. How did you figure out to do that? Because I mean, I've been to like in men's groups and things, study all sorts of different modalities. And my and I know about your fucking happy game, but I'm pretty sure I independently thought of my own sort of modality to do that. But it's the same thing. It's just bringing awareness to how I've created this emotion set. And what I noticed is I started tracking it like every hour or something. And then after a week, I realized just by sort of tracking it, gently tracking it, like just putting a little spreadsheet and go, how do I feel 1 to 10? Oh, 7. Okay, fine. And that was it for the first week. But what I realized, even by the end of that first week, my numbers started raising just because I was aware of it. And then the second week, I started going, okay, if I'm a 6, what can I do to get to like a 6.5 or a 7? Usually just a breath, just opening up a little bit. Or if I'm a 4 to a little 5, or like a 9 to a little 10, right? And then it just spiraled up. And once I got into the habit of realizing, oh, I can really create, adjust my emotion set to sort of face whatever I'm facing, good hand, bad hand, adversity, or sunshine. But my reaction to it is what I have the power. And for anybody who's writers, that's what we're doing as screenwriters. We're creating a reality for our characters. and you can use some of those same exact skills for your actual life itself. It's awesome. So how did you figure out the fucking
it like everything else, it just comes to me, right?
Yeah.
So when you live in that state of alignment, you get the inspirations that come through. A lot of this work and a lot of my focus is, again, like on the practicality of it.
Yeah.
So you'll see, like, when you follow, spiritual world, there's lots of great teachers like Joe Dispenza or Deepak or Wayne Dyer or Gabby Bernstein. Like, there's a lot of teachers out there who teach this stuff. And it's like I said earlier, like, I had spent a lot of time consuming, and, consuming is great and new insights is great. But what I noticed is a lot of people who are studying this work weren't experiencing a whole lot of transformation. And so for me, the focus has really been on, like, okay, how do we get people to experience this stuff? How do we get people to have the shifts and step into what it is they're really looking for? And as I did this work, and I have been doing this work for a long time and continue to do this work, the irony is that it's not the complicated stuff that creates the results. People get obsessed with, are my chakras spinning the right way? Is my third eye open? Am I saying the right chants in the morning? Is my sound bowl attuned to the right frequency? Like, none of that stuff matters, right? What matters is what you're practicing in here, what you're practicing in here. And you don't need years and years and years of talk therapy to shift this stuff. Like the example I gave about the entrepreneur earlier with the money block, like, I shifted that for her in 45 minutes, right? And it's something that she was struggling with for 20 years. So it's not about needing big, complicated things to create shifts in your reality. It's just about knowing where to look.
Yeah, I love that. And that's definitely the case with screenwriting too. People, there's all sorts of aspects to it, but like, if you just nail your premise, like, not just make it good, but make it really great, and there's ways to do it, it's so simple. We're talking about one sentence, you can describe your premise. And that can make a profound difference in terms of everything that happens afterwards and realizing that vision. And it's the same thing with sports too. Sports, if you see, any of the great athletes, they have styles and blah, 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 but a lot of it, their fundamentals are just so good. They're just
and I would say when I look at the top athletes, like the top 5 athletes in like NHL or NBA, I don't think they're athletically better than everybody else in the league. They're tuned to a feeling where, like, a little bit of extra magic where they know where to go or where to put the puck or where to put the ball in a way that most of those other players aren't receiving.
Yeah. Well, in particularly that great saying about Wayne Gretzky is I skate to where the puck will be, right? And it's kind of like, like whatever. But if you read it from the other way, there was something a little energetic about that. He's tuning into the synchronicity of the movements in a way that's a little bit different than other people who are physically really. I mean, look, you don't get to the professional level unless you're like a physical beast. But then what separates that from the best of the physical beast? And I do think it's this sensitivity to synchronicity in a way. And getting back to my screenwriters, that's what we're looking for when we build relationships. Like, what's the sort of, because every script that I sold, it's always synchronistic. It's not like, oh, do this, this, this. I mean, there's a process, a system that can make it more likely, but when it actually happens, it's always synchronistic and kind of feels almost magic. Why? Just because of the nature. The numbers are so great in terms of, all the people looking for stuff and all the stuff that have. So when it happens, there's always a sort of magic to it. But you have to be open to the synchronicity and sensitive to it in a way and be able to progress forward in a way that's not too crazy, right?
And I would say one of the most important things too is, like, have fun, right? Don't write. So when people ask me about writing, one of the first things I share is don't write to sell a book, write for the joy of writing itself, right? So people ask me, Nick, when are you going to write another book? And my answer is always, fuck, I don't know, whenever it shows up, right? So it's like, when I write when the inspiration there, when the impulse is there, when it feels right, when it feels fun. And, like, even if I had the world's most insightful knowledge sitting in my head right now, if it didn't excite me to put it on paper, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right. So with screenwriters, I think, yeah, like the end goal is selling a screenplay and all that jazz, but just don't forget about the reason you came to screenwrite play writing in the first place, which was probably for the enjoyment of the process.
Yeah. God, that's absolutely one of the primary things I'm always saying. That's the guaranteed compensation too, is that intrinsic joy of demonstrating this life lesson through some sort of transformation of your hero, and just the realization of, oh, here's how I see life as expressed by this protagonist in this journey. That intrinsically is so deeply satisfying, and and the paradox is, the more you're in it just for that reason, and the joy and the soulful satisfaction of that, the more you cross milestones, because it sets you apart energetically from other people that are like, oh crap, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, hustle. Okay, we've been talking for a while. Let's wrap this up. Where can people where would you like people to go to get more information about you, and maybe work with you, or you've got this great community? Tell them about how to find you.
Yeah, I'm a little bit all over the place. I would say the best. So for me, it's all about like energetics. So like if you want to learn, it's not even about the words being said, but it's like just tuning into the vibration, right? The undertone of what's being said. And I feel like the best way to do that is to just join us in the live call. So we do a free live call every Tuesday, a live broadcast. I think a few hundred people show up to that. The website, if you go to live.nickbreau.com, you can sign up there to get notified, and it just sends an email reminder every Tuesday about the episode. And I think it sends maybe a couple of gift meditations and a few fun little things. So the best place to start, I would say, would be at live.nickbreau.com. But again, I got podcasts on Spotify and all over the place called Change Your Reality. I've got books on Amazon, Power Manifesting. So depending on how you like to consume stuff, I've got a little bit of everything.
Awesome. Nick, thank you so much for showing up.
Man, it's anytime. It's always a blast. I think Hollywood and screenwriting and acting and all that jazz is such a fun profession. And you guys are probably shaking your heads and saying not always, but it looks like such a fun world, and I'm happy to come and chat and play with you guys anytime.
Cool. Thank you, brother. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Bye.